everybody knows that organized crime is in drugs, prostitution, and gambling, what everybody doesn't know is that organized crime may have worked its way into another big money area, the construction of a nuclear power plant. The one just completed at Shoreham, New York, a suburb of New York City, fits that picture. When construction of Shoreham began in 1969, the projected cost was $261 million. The completed cost was $4.2 billion. But it wasn't just the huge cost overrun that caught the attention of New York State and Suffolk County, where the plant is located. They say the plant is unsafe, that people living around the plant can't be evacuated in case of an emergency, and that the plant has no security against sabotage. And recently, as Ed Bradley reports, former employees have come forward with accounts of negligence and criminal activity by corrupt unions during the construction of Shoreham.
The Teamsters ran one whole side of the plant. We used to call it the Teamster area, or the west end of the plant. And to do inspections in that area, you were required to make an appointment, give a phone call, let them know when you would be coming up to that area.
George Henry was a quality control inspector for 2 years at the Shoreham nuclear plant. His job was to see to it that the safety systems of the nuclear reactor, the systems designed to protect both workers in the plant and the general public once the plant was in operation, were constructed according to the regulations of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Henry told us what he has told the county legislature and the FBI, that he and his fellow inspectors were often unable to do their job properly because of the power of the unions.
We had several situations where they would just throw down their tools and walk off the job or get extremely indignant.
Jock McChrystal's job at Shoreham was to make sure the right parts and materials were used in a particular phase of construction. Often, he says, workers substituted the wrong materials without authorization. And, as he told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, there was outright sabotage of perfectly good work.
Sabotage of work?
Absolutely. How that would occur would be you and I are a gang, a steam fitter gang. Two men make up a gang, okay? Our assignment is to put in a gauge, all right? Any kind of gauge. One of us goes off and gets the quality control inspector. The other guy gets to lollygag around. Now, if a quality control inspector doesn't show up for 5 hours, you're still making $19 an hour, right? No problem. Meanwhile, you sit around. That's one of the reasons why paying costs so much. Okay, the quality control inspector shows up. He does his 30-second bid. He gives it a visual inspection. Maybe he measures the size of the weld bead. He says, okay, he signs off on it, and he leaves. In the process of gathering up your tools, you look around, you take your chipping hammer, you whack the glass on the front of the gauge. It's no longer calibrated correctly because the seal's been broken, and the next shift gets to cut it out, and another shift gets to put it in. More work for you, more work for the next guy.
Same job done twice.
Same job done 4 and 5 times sometimes. I mean, that, you know, there's no reason but absolute union control for the fact that the job went on for 15 years.
Both McChrystal and Henry say they witnessed theft at the plant. The first time Henry saw a large piece of equipment disappear into a waiting truck outside the Shoreham fence, he couldn't believe it.
I happened to witness a cement mixer in midair, and I thought this was kind of strange at the vantage point that I had at the time in the plant. So I had to walk around the other side of the building, and sure enough, the cement mixer was in the air. It was hanging on the end of a crane, and it was being hoisted over the outside perimeter of the chain link fencing of the plant.
Did you see theft there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, theft was so organized that sometimes 2 and 3 different unions were involved.
McChrystal told us theft wasn't the only problem.
And there were problems with the way they did testing. There were problems with the worker qualifications. Many times, I mean, there were people in charge who didn't graduate out of high school, who were in charge of the Class 1 nuclear safety systems. People who were on hard drugs as inspectors.
Hard drugs?
Hard drugs, needle drugs. I mean, want me to say it that way? Needle drugs. Guys who were out of Vietnam, who became junkies over there, came back here. You got to remember, Shoreham's the largest work site in the history of New York State. The unions controlled the whole place. They put their You know, if they had a guy who needed a year to go on his retirement, put him at Shoreham, let him coast. If they had a guy that was in trouble, he was onto drugs, and he might fall off a building here in New York, put him at Shoreham, let him stare at the water. That was the way it was. And that's the way the plant was built.
These were things you saw with your own eyes?
Yes, sir.
Can the stories Henry and McChrystal told us, and which they have told to federal and state authorities, can their stories of union control and corruption be believed? Lieutenant Remo Franceschini of the New York City Police Department thinks so.
Who actually ran the show at Shoreham?
I would say the unions actually ran the show at Shoreham.
And the unions were controlled by?
In many instances by organized crime.
Unions involved in the construction of a nuclear power plant controlled by organized crime? Absolutely, says Lieutenant Franceschini. His police unit tracks organized crime in the New York metropolitan area.
I think they have a great influence in the construction business. They pack the unions with their own people, and eventually they take over the unions by sheer numbers. And then through intimidation and threats, it's very difficult to fight them in a union situation.
Who controlled the unions at the Shoreham construction site?
The laborers' union had great influence from the Lucchese crime family. Indirectly, the Lucchese crime family controlled many of those laborers out in Shoreham. And the people that really produced the supplies there, the Teamsters Union, was controlled by the Gambino crime family.
Is there any doubt in your mind but that organized crime had their hands in the construction of that plant and took money out of it?
There's no doubt in my mind.
The Shoreham plant in Suffolk County, a $4 billion cost overrun. How much of that can be attributed to the mob?
I would say millions. For the simple reason that was a very long endeavor, by a builder and by builders. It's a perfect pork barrel for organized crime to reap money out of that systematically over the years. On no-show jobs, on kickbacks, on be able to get rid of stolen merchandise that they come into.
Did the Nuclear Regulatory Commission know about the role of organized crime in some of the unions at Shoreham? They should have if they had followed the trial of this man, Dan Cunningham, now serving a prison term for labor racketeering. Cunningham owned, that's the only word for it, he owned the security guards union that provided guards for Shoreham. Ken McCallion was a special prosecutor with the organized crime unit of the Justice Department. He handled Cunningham's trial.
Well, I believe it's a matter of public record that Daniel Cunningham purchased the union for a sum of money from the former president of the Allied International Union of Security Guards and Special Police. It's also been documented that that union has been controlled by organized crime from the time of its inception in the late 1960s. While Daniel Cunningham was president of the union, there were never any elections held. He had bought the union, and he used the union to maximize his return on his particular investment.
Cunningham's control of the security guards union enabled him to cut sweetheart deals with the people who hired his members.
Cunningham was in a position in negotiating union contracts and fringe benefits where he had a fair amount of discretion. And obviously, an employer's profits, to a large extent, are determined by the union contract. So Mr. Cunningham had substantial leverage over really any employer.
That control over the security guards, law enforcement officials say, is what got the guards to look the other way when equipment was stolen under their noses. But what about the deficiencies reported by inspectors to the Long Island Lighting Company? They were supposed to be passed on to the NRC and the deficiencies corrected. But Henry told us that instead, his superiors would tell him to rewrite the reports, and that when work didn't live up to required standards, the standards would be lowered. He told us about one major problem, a diesel generator that was to take over in a power failure to prevent a meltdown in the reactor core.
One day a diesel broke.
Yes.
And the crankshaft broke?
Yes, the crankshaft 7 and 2.
And now this was, you had warned that there may be a problem here.
Myself and several other inspectors had written numerous, I'm talking about hundreds, of deficiency reports on the diesel generators a year and a half to 2 years, or even further back, but no scrutiny was given to these reports.
But when it did happen, your superiors had to say, George, you were right?
You would think they would say that. I was suspended. I was suspended the next working day, yes.
Why?
It was quite obvious that they didn't want me around any longer to see the fix or whatever they were going to do with the dilapidated diesel at this point. So I was escorted off the site by the security force.
If you testified, if you came forward, you were immediately ostracized. And if not ostracized, outright threatened. I mean, I had all kinds of overt threats and actual things happened to me. Things dropped out of the sky, a bucket of bolts one day. The next day, a ladder fell next to me. That was it. I mean, 3 strikes, I might have been out. So I left.
Local law enforcement officials told us they knew of no illegal or unsafe activities during the 15 years the plant was under construction. How could that be? Well, the site was and still is private property. Only Lilco and the NRC have the right to enter, to make inspections, or to give others permission to do so. So we asked them to give us a look and to answer some questions. Questions that had been raised not just by us, but by the governor of New York, by Suffolk County officials, and by people who live in this area. The NRC said they couldn't talk with us because they're involved in judging the plant. However, it should be pointed out that there are no regulations that prohibit them from talking with us. And Lilco said they wouldn't permit us on the site, and they also said that it wouldn't be beneficial for them to grant our request for an interview. But it's not just 60 Minutes that can't get into the plant. Neither can local government officials. Wayne Prospect is a member of the Suffolk County Legislature.
The county attempted to have an independent inspection of the Shoreham nuclear power plant. We made pleas to Long Island Lighting Company. As a matter of fact, the county did the unprecedented thing when they appropriated $3 million for the express purpose of hiring an independent group of engineering experts to go out at Shoreham. But again, Lilco said no.
Prospect initially wanted the inspection of Shoreham because county cement inspectors had told him that the concrete used in the reactor containment building might be no good. And who was in charge of deliveries of concrete at Shoreham? John Cody, the head of the Teamsters Local, and an associate of the Gambino and Lucchese crime families, who is now serving a 5-year prison term for labor racketeering. At Cody's trial, it was revealed that, in general, if he didn't get a kickback from contractors, they wouldn't be able to deliver concrete. And who did get that concrete job at Shoreham? In some cases, the same contractors who had earlier supplied defective concrete for the county sewer system. New York Governor Mario Cuomo thinks Shoreham is unsafe and has had as little success as we have in getting the local records to find out if that is indeed the case.
I am the governor of the state. We have nearly 18 million people. You're supposed to take care of the health and welfare of your people. Here's this enormous threat to our people, and I don't have a veto power over it. And I went to Washington, I said, that's wrong. I said, you people under President Reagan believe in the new federalism. You're always talking about states' rights. You're always talking about giving us the responsibility. I'll take it. Give me, the governor of the state of New York, the responsibility to deal with this plant, and I'll handle it. They won't do it.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has publicly, at least, said nothing about the reports of corruption and the organized crime connection in the unions at Shoreham. And despite the objection from the state and the county, the NRC granted a low-power license to Shoreham late last month. But after the FBI began looking into George Henry's allegations, and under pressure from a lawsuit brought by New York, which charged that Shoreham did not meet the NRC's own security rules, it withdrew the license. The Long Island Lighting Company is appealing that decision.